Hey Gardener, Taylor here from the Community Garden Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to provide you with some housekeeping items before we get started. If you're new to the podcast, every week, every 2 weeks, the beginning of the podcast gets updated. So the information that I'm delivering to you right now is relevant and will be removed when it's no longer relevant. So if you've already heard this, if you're binge watching or binge listening, fast forward to about 5 or 6 minutes and we'll launch into the actual episode. So for today, it is currently the week of October 20th. And for folks in the Northern Hemisphere or for folks who are in similar zones, I'm in zone 6B and my first frost date is supposed to be early October. It's now October 20th and we still haven't actually had a frost, but the plants are starting to be damaged from the cold. We're getting about -3 degrees Celsius overnight right now, at least tonight. So we're pretty much done in the garden now. If you haven't had a chance, go into your garden and just remove. Actually, you could technically leave your entire garden, but if you're planning to remove anything from your garden, go ahead and snip the plants at the base. Don't actually pull them up out of the soil as long as they weren't diseased. You can go ahead and let them break down into the soil, and it also helps with better water access for next year, getting water down into the soil, and will help a little bit with soil erosion. If your plants were diseased, pull them out fully. You can also leave all of your plants over winter. You do not need to take them out of your garden. Don't let anyone make you think so. So now that we're done with the season, there's likely nothing else coming out of your garden. I still have a few loofahs, some flowers still going, a couple of small things, but for the most part, the season is over, folks. So my suggestion to you over the next couple of weeks, this will probably be the last time I update this until realistically November, December. I would really love for you to make notes about your gardening season. Please, please, please journal. Write down the things that you learned this year. Write down the things that you want to do differently next year. Write your observations down. Write your questions down. Write all your ideas down. Spring you will thank winter you, okay? Please. Also, as you're out in your garden mourning its loss, if you see any seeds that have matured, you can go ahead and pop them off your plants. Marigolds are a really fun way to save seeds. You'll wait for the seed heads to, become dry and crunchy, and they usually turn black. You can go ahead and pop them off. You can store them in a paper bag. There's lots of fun plants to pull seeds off of. Snapdragons, the little heads turn brown, and then they have little holes in the top, and you can flip it over and shake the seeds into your hand. Another fun one is coriander or cilantro. It's very obvious when the seeds are ready, so take a peek at the plants that are still in your garden, see if you can pull any seeds off them. Also, this is for anyone listening to this podcast. If you've ever thought about organizing a community garden, requesting a community garden in whatever area you live in, now is the time to start thinking about that if you have any sort of winter break. So right now, we're not going to be gardening now until March, April. So we do all of our prep work during the winter months. So this is when we take new garden requests. This is when we assess new sites. We discuss partnerships with different organizations. So if this is something that you have been personally wanting to do or your organization has been wanting to do, now is the time to start prepping. Okay, let's talk about some local activities. So these are folks who are in Southern Ontario. You live in Brantford, Brant County, Hamilton, Haldimand, Norfolk, and you want to get involved with our organization. We have a couple of things coming up that I want to put on your radar. So we are participating in the Brantford Santa Claus Parade. November 30th, we are having another parade float. Last year, we had a really fun 50-foot parade float. One of our volunteers, Ken, built a massive greenhouse on the float. I made a bunch of vegetable costumes. They were like sandwich board costumes. It was so much fun. The float definitely was DIY, but it was so cute and we really had a blast doing it together. So we're going to be doing it again this year. If you want to participate, our parade committee is going to be meeting on October 20th in the evening virtually, and you can get that link from me by emailing grow@egcgbrant.ca, or you can take a peek at our show notes page for the podcast and click the Contact Us button, and that would be the communitygardenpodcast.ca. So Santa Claus Parade, come join us. You get to dictate how much time you can give. You do not need to have any experience. Next thing, so this is very exciting. A couple of years ago, we hosted an Earth Day Community Garden Building Festival. Nope, Earth Day Community Building Festival, and we're going to be kind of re-envisioning that festival as a garden festival this year located at the Greenhouse and Learning Center. It'll be the grand opening. So that'll be happening in June of 2025. It's now all hands on deck to get this festival planned. So if you want to volunteer with us on the committee on the day of, whatever the case is, email grow@egcgbrant.ca or go to the show notes page. We're also looking for organizations who want to participate in an educational way or, have some sort of offering day of. So if you work in the horticulture, green space, environmental, gardening world, and you have something educational to offer or something of value to offer during the festival and you want to promote the organization or you want to participate, reach out, please. If you have ever thought about joining the board of directors for Eagle Ground Community Gardens, we will be having our annual general meeting in January. This is just something for you to start thinking about now. We're always recruiting for director positions as well as for committee lead positions. So I will update this when we have the final date, but our AGM's in January, and just start thinking maybe you want to get involved on the back end. We also are hosting a tree planting event at the new greenhouse site on November 2nd at 10 a.m. So you can come. Please ensure you are wearing closed-toed shoes, although it's a little too cold to be wearing sandals anyways, and consider bringing a shovel and some drinking water. We're going to be planting a permaculture orchard. This will give you a good opportunity to see the greenhouse, to see the park before maybe other folks have been able to. Also, Belonging Brant, we mentioned this in episode 8 with Armanda Lambert. Belonging Brant is hosting the ABCD Symposium for 2025 in May, and we are currently planning for the symposium. We're looking for community members to come join our committee. So if this is something that interests you, you want to learn more about ABCD, asset-based community development, shoot me a message. And finally, for my organizations that are listening, I have a couple of recommendations for you. If you haven't gotten to it yet, episode 9 with Roger Doran is about seed money. It's a fundraising platform for community gardens. It is a global platform. Please check out that episode and register for a seed money campaign. Your registration has to be in by November 12th, and then the campaign for anyone listening runs from November 15th to December 15th. And look into all the campaigns that are running and please consider donating. There is an Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure Grant due October 31st. If you've ever thought about building a greenhouse with your community garden organization, this may be a grant opportunity for you. And if you just Google Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure, it should come up. It's due by October 31st. There's also a grant right now through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. It's their Grow Grant. It's due by November 4th. And this allows various organizations to sustain their operations. It has nothing to do with gardening. But if you have been looking for an operations or a programming grant, this may be the grant for you. So I just wanted to share some of these pieces with you. I apologize. This is a little bit longer than normal. It's because I love to talk. Yeah, we're at 8 minutes. So I'm going to let you go. We're going to get into the episode now. I hope you enjoy it. As always, you can always reach out to us at podcast@egcgbrant. You can reach out to us through the show notes page at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. Email me, message me, send us a message on social media. I'm always happy to answer questions and help you out. Okay, let's get started. Hey gardener, you're listening to the Community Garden Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor. In this space, we'll dig into the dirt with local gardeners of all skill levels to share tips, tricks, and stories from our gardening adventures. Let's get growing. Hey gardeners, Taylor here. You're listening to the Community Garden Podcast. Today we have an extra special episode for you. It's kind of outside of our normal realm. Typically we're interviewing more local gardeners, but today we're chatting with Roger Doran from Seed Money. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Seed Money, it is a fundraising platform. It's free, so there's no fees associated, and it's specifically designed for community gardens to have a platform to raise money on and also access grants. So Roger operates a nonprofit. Eagle Ground has participated in seed money for this will be our 5th year. We will be participating in it again this year. And we have used this platform and we've raised anywhere from $500 to $3,000. And all of the money gets pushed back into our programming. So it's a really great platform. And the nonprofit itself provides a ton of resources to help run a successful campaign. So applications are due by November 12th. And this is annually. The campaigns run from November 15th to December 15th, and it also covers the Global Movement Giving Tuesday. So today we're chatting with Roger about how the platform operates. We chat with Roger about how to get involved and also the history of seed money, which actually goes back to Kitchen Gardeners International, which is no longer operating. It's, morphed into seed money, but they also helped run the Eat the View campaign in 2008, which was a campaign to get the White House to install a food garden, which was successful. It was installed in 2009, but I'll let Roger speak about that. In addition to chatting about seed money, we also chat about Roger's origin story and how he got started in gardening, which was very fascinating, as well as the current gardening practices he uses in his space. So Roger is not local to this area. Roger is from Maine, which if you are just not familiar with North America at all, Maine and our part of Southern Ontario are kind of on the same, we're in the same lateral area, but still quite far from each other. So, and Maine also is in the US and we're here in Canada. So it is a bit different, but our growing seasons are actually very similar. I did do some research after, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that our growing seasons are our environment is actually very, very similar. So let's dig in. Hello, Roger. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so grateful to be sitting here with you this morning, chatting about the great work you do. Do you want to introduce yourself and explain who you are and where you're from?
Well, it's a delight to be with you, Taylor. So my name is Roger Dwarin. I'm based in Scarborough, Maine, USA, and I'm the founder and director of a nonprofit organization called Seed Money. And so I'm delighted to share a little bit about Seed Money with you, but also just talk gardener to gardener with you.
Yeah, I know. It's always great. You're actually the first guest that we've had that is not located within our immediate range. You were here in Southern Ontario in a small town in Brantford. And you said you're located in Maine, which is exciting, but you guys have a similar, almost better growing season than we do.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. So we're in like 6A. I'm not sure if you use the same hardiness zones up in Canada.
Yep, so it's all
But
the same map. Yeah.
so we're probably 6A on our way to 6B, like so many places in the world now that are warming up.
Yeah, so we're technically 6B. We used to be 6A, I don't know, I want to say 10 plus years ago before I started gardening. And then when they had shifted a lot of the zones, we became 6B. But if you do go a little bit north, like in that Toronto area, they're 6A as well. So yeah, it really depends on where you are. We get some really funky weather here. I think you guys do too. So I would love to hear a little bit about the organization itself and how it works both locally and more on a broad platform, because I know that you guys do operate globally as well.
Yeah, so Seed Money does work nationally and internationally. Most of our work does happen in the United States, but the work that we do is we're out there to basically make the lives of gardeners a little bit easier. People who are involved in public food garden projects. They're these local heroes who are just trying to get a garden planted every year and get the most good stuff out of it they possibly can. And so we provide them with some funding tools and some funding incentives in the form of what we call our Seed Money Challenge. And we're getting excited for the next Seed Money Challenge. It's an annual challenge that runs from November 15th to December 15th. So we're definitely ramping up right now. We have lots of garden projects that are signing up. And so basically it's a crowdfunding challenge where we also throw some grants into the mix. And it's open to any food garden project located anywhere in the world. So it's always fun at this time of the year to see the various garden projects that are signing up, whether they're from the United States or from Africa or Asia or Canada, of course. So that's sort of our model. And we've been doing this for 20 years, but the crowdfunding model actually is relatively new. We started with a different focus and actually a different name. We were initially called Kitchen Gardeners International for the first 10 years of our life or so. And our focus at that time was really on backyard gardens, people's personal gardens. because that's sort of where I was in my own gardening journey. I was really focused on growing food for myself and my family and trying to encourage other people to do that as well. But then we had the point in our development where we felt like we needed to sort of shift gears. We needed to think in terms of who out there doesn't have access to gardens and these delicious foods, and how can we try to reach those people. So we made a switch to focus more on what we call public food gardens, and specifically the funding of those gardens. So that's sort of the story of seed money.
I actually didn't know that it had a previous name or previous focus, and that's kind of relatable to what we do. So we support 32 community gardens in the Brant area. Many of them are on public property, so they're located directly within the parks in the city, and people can go visit them at any time. But in 2020, when many of our parks here, a lot of our recreational activities had to shut down during the pandemic, and obviously that's problematic when you're trying to serve food to the community. So a lot of local gardeners, residential gardeners, grew gardens in their own homes with the intention of donating the produce into the food bank system to their neighbors, to their friends. And so we actually run also a program called the Host Garden Program, where we'll give all the same support that we give the community gardens to people growing food in their own backyards. Our main focus is for those community gardens, but yeah, a lot of good work can be done within the backyard garden too. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And we certainly are continuing to encourage those backyard gardens because they're definitely part of the solution as well.
So you mentioned that you used to be, it was Kitchen Gardens International?
Kitchen Gardeners
Kitchen
International, yes.
Gardeners International. I'm curious to hear about the history of Seed Money or Kitchen Gardeners International, how you got started, why you got started. I mean, you have explained the shift and the change in focus, but I'm curious to hear how this all started from the very beginning.
Yeah, so you're sort of asking about my own gardening origin story. And so I started just, as a lot of people do, having some exposure to gardening as a kid. My parents grew a pretty simple sort of tomato and cucumber garden in the backyard. So I definitely had some early exposure to that, but it actually took me to go to Europe and live in Europe for a while to really see gardens in a different way. And I met a young woman over there at the time and was just thoroughly enjoying being able to go out to the countryside where she was from. She was from Belgium, and see kind of what gardening looks like for people over there. And it was an eye-opening experience and a mouth-watering experience in the sense that there was just this really close relationship between the garden and the kitchen. And I was really just kind of won over at that point. And at that time, I was living and working in Brussels for an environmental nonprofit that was also doing some work related to food, sustainable food production. And so for me, it was like, if you wanted to talk with people about environmentalism or health, social justice, sometimes those can be pretty vague concepts for people. So what I started to understand was that food, and especially growing some of your own food, was really a great way to get a conversation started with people about some really, bigger societal issues. So the seeds of Seed Money were sort of sown when I was living in Europe in the 1990s. And that young woman I mentioned, well, we got married over there and we had 3 sons over there. And after a certain point in time, I was sort of eager to get back to my roots in the United States and sort of have a living experience over here. And I was initially working at some other nonprofit organizations related to food and local foods. And so I started up Kitchen Gardeners International in 2003 because of that passion that I had for backyard gardening, and I wanted to share that with more people. So initially, Kitchen Gardeners International was really just sort of like an information hub for people who wanted to, connect online, share stories about what they're growing in their backyard. But then we did morph a little bit because we started to attract a bit of a following. And I realized that there was a kind of an interesting opportunity in 2008. We were once again, as we are in the United States right now, in the midst of an election season. And I had this idea and an opportunity to try to sort of inject a little bit of gardening into the political conversation by starting up a campaign called the Eat the View campaign to encourage the next president of the United States to plant a garden at the White House, without knowing who that next president was going to be at the time. So the campaign started when we knew that it was going to be a contest between Barack Obama and John McCain. And in terms of garden projects that I've been involved with that have been memorable ones, well, that was a very memorable one and a very successful one, just because we ended up, being able to really capture people's imagination and attention with our campaign. And ultimately, we caught the attention of Michelle Obama and, all of those hopes that we had for a number of months leading up to inauguration. Well, they actually took the form of a garden, which is still there at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. So that was a real turning point for our organization, which was still called Kitchen Gardeners International at that time. But after that point, as my board and I were thinking about, okay, we did this sort of impressive thing, which was we brought a bunch of gardeners together, not only in the United States, but actually globally, to push for this really high-profile garden that some of the most powerful people in the world were actually going to be eating out of. And well, that's really cool. But then we had this period of reflection after that where we said to ourselves, we do need to make a shift now. We need to start thinking about, who else deserves to have access to healthy foods and to, healthy forms of recreation. That provides a little bit more context for the shift that I mentioned before, where we went from focusing on home gardens to public food gardens.
Wow. There's so much there that I didn't know about. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm definitely going to be doing a little bit of digging. I think that, you guys have made incredible waves, and I think that all of that is incredible. And, bringing us up to the work that Seed Money is doing now, you have a very rich history, and it's really great. It's great to hear about. Thank you. So for Seed Money now, how many gardeners on average or community garden campaigns are registering and Seed Money is supporting?
So the number of garden projects that have been participating year after year, we're generally somewhere in the 500 garden range. Last year, we actually got up to about 630 projects participating. Unfortunately, not all of those projects end up raising money. And that's something that we're continuing to try to work on to sort of perfect our systems and to train people also to become better fundraisers, because our model really does require that the participating garden projects do legwork on their own. We can't, raise the funds for them. We can provide financial incentives in the form of challenge grants, but we can't actually do the work on the ground. But this year, for example, we're going to be giving out, I think it's 432 challenge grants, which range in size from $100 up to $1,000. Roughly 2/3 of the projects that participate will get some funding. And once again, we're trying to increase that number as well over time.
Amazing. And do you want to walk us through what the process looks like for a community garden platform to participate, how the platform actually works? You've kind of explained that it's crowdfunding. And then if you want to also dive into the details about the different grant options that are awarded.
Sure. So the way it works, if you're associated with any type of a public food garden project, whether it's a community garden, a school garden, a food bank garden, something like that, you would go to seedmoney.org and you'll see an apply button, and that will give you some information about how the system works, including another button you can click that takes you to the crowdfunding website. And so once you're there at the crowdfunding website, it's a fairly standard process where you create an account, and we'll sort of walk you through the steps to get your application properly submitted. And it's really a storytelling exercise in the end. You're telling a story about your garden project, why it's amazing, what your impacts are, or you would sort of imagine your impacts to be, because we also have a lot of garden projects that haven't even broken ground yet. So it's a storytelling opportunity, storytelling via photos and text. And we also provide some tips about how to do that in the most sort of impactful way. And then at that point, you're sort of like sitting tight for the launch of the campaign, which is November 15th. And all of the campaigns launch exactly at the same time, and they conclude at the same time. And so there's this 30-day period where garden projects really have the opportunity to reach out to all of the people that support them or that could support them, and to make the case that, your support is needed more than ever because we have this limited opportunity, a 30-day window during which, your funds can really make a big difference, because funds that are donated help a project qualify for even more funds via our challenge grants. And so that's how the process works. And once the challenge period begins, we're in touch with all of our projects on nearly a daily basis to sort of cheer them on, to give them additional tips about how they can make the most out of their project. And we provide them with sample texts and graphics. Once again, it's really about sort of holding the hands of these people so that they feel comfortable in that space, because we have so many participants who have never done any crowdfunding before. And so we know it can feel a little bit daunting. And we're trying to take kind of the fear factor out of it so that people feel really comfortable and supported. And so the way that the grants work is that they are competitive grants. We can't give huge grants out to everybody. So we have a certain number of grants. I mentioned before, it's something like 430. And the grants are given out on a sliding scale, at least most of them. So the more funds that a project raises, the higher the grant it can qualify for. But we've set up our distribution of grants in such a way that we have a lot of small grants as well, so that we're really trying to make this program very accessible to smaller garden projects. So we do give out a lot of $100 grants, a lot of $200 grants. And the way that we figure out which projects get which grants in the end is we look at where projects landed once the campaign closes on December 15th. We create like a ranking, and then we divvy up the funds according to that ranking. But we also have some funds available for projects that really aren't sort of well placed to do the crowdfunding part. But those projects are mostly located in the global south or the developing world, where there really isn't sort of that crowdfunding culture. And then finally, in January, I have the great pleasure to send out a bunch of checks across the country and around the world in the form of international online payments and things like that. So the funds are landing in groups' bank accounts in January, which, as you know, is a great time to have some funds arrive.
Yeah, so Eagle Ground has participated. It's 2024, I think, for 4 years now. This will be our 5th year, I believe. It was previously run by our founder, Sherilyn Toski, but the last 2 years I've taken over and we have participated in seed money. The first year was definitely a learning curve, understanding the platform, editing our campaign, things like that. But for folks listening who might be interested in running a campaign this year, this episode's being released October 21st, and you have until November 12th to submit a campaign. And I'll include everything that you need in our show notes, but it's very easy platform. It's very user-friendly. It was pretty quick to set up. And then that process of getting paid is also very easy. For folks who are interested, I'll put some more information in the show notes and you can go ahead and register for the platform.
I'll just add one more thing, which is that the platform is 100% free. We don't assess any fees. We believe really strongly that we're out there to help organizations raise money. We're not trying to make money off of you. So that is a difference between what we offer and some other crowdfunding platforms where they charge what they call a platform fee or something like that. If your project raises $1,000, it receives $1,000 and probably a little bit more once the grants are added in as well.
Yeah, it's incredible. And this is all in USD, just for anyone wondering. We do have a majority of our listener base is Canadian, so just keep in mind that all of the number values we're talking about is American dollars. So question, Roger, do you know seed money's impact to date?
Well, there are different ways to measure an organization's impact, of course. So we look at some different metrics. We look at the number of garden projects that we've helped over the years. And we really got started with the crowdfunding model in 2015. We had given out a number of small grants before sort of renaming ourselves as Seed Money, but those were more traditional grants of $200 or $500 here or there. So we really started to keep track, though, when we made this switch to the crowdfunding model and the name Seed Money, which was in 2015. And so since that time, we have provided support to over 2,900 garden projects in all 50 US states and about 40 different countries. So obviously something we're really proud of to see those kinds of numbers. But then another metric that we track, because we have money in our name, is the money. And so this year we will go over $3 million raised and distributed to all of those projects. As you know, as a gardener yourself, it doesn't take a lot of money to get a garden project started and to keep one going. If you can think of all of those projects that have received, $300 here, $600 there, you can grow a lot of, high quality, delicious food with those types of sums.
I know there's always this misconception that gardening is so expensive and the startup cost is really expensive. And yeah, of course, if you're going out to purchase the best quality, galvanized steel garden beds and you're purchasing every piece of equipment you could ever think of, it's going to add up. But at the end of the day, you really don't need much to grow food. And I'm constantly telling people that it really just a seed, some dirt, some water, and you're going to get something. So yeah, it can happen. It can happen on a budget. So $3 million is an insane number. I think that's fabulous. Good work.
Well, thanks. And it is important to point out that there are some big projects out there that have bigger needs as well, too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of one of the bigger community gardens in your community, there's always something else that they want to do or need to do. For example, putting in a greenhouse or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be talking about some pretty big investments in that case. So we're trying to position ourselves so that we can be helping for some of those bigger needs as well.
Mm-hmm. We actually are working on installing a greenhouse at our largest location that we've been working with the municipality here on, and that's our Greenhouse and Learning Center. For folks listening and who are local, it's going in at Woodman Park Community Center, which is also a youth hub. It's located beside an elementary school, and this has been working with us. They just installed 60 4x8 garden beds, as well as accessible garden beds. There's a fruit orchard, tons of, fruit shrubs. And then the greenhouse itself is being funded through a grant that we received. So that site definitely is a pretty penny. And the community gardens that we operate on public property are a little bit more expensive because the city does invest in, the galvanized steel beds. They put signage in. So the city property ones definitely are on the more expensive side, but we also support private facilities that want to put gardens in, and some of them are growing directly in the ground, and they don't need anything besides plants and seeds, right? So the seeds are cheap and some of the smaller equipment's cheap, but yeah, once you start to dabble in some of those larger projects, it can get quite expensive. We're currently working with another private site on getting a greenhouse in for them so that they can serve their community better, and just getting the quotes for that has been quite expensive.
Yeah,
so,
I can imagine.
Yeah, so you guys are supporting all manner of projects then, which is really cool. I know the last 2 years that we've run the project, the funding that we've raised has gone into the greenhouse project for the items that the greenhouse has to be outfitted with and the equipment that we need to purchase to do our learning portion of it. So that's what we've been using seed money for the last 2 years.
Sounds like a great use of funds.
So I'm curious, where does your funding actually come from? And if we have potential funders who want to get involved, who want to donate, what does that process look like?
So seed money receives funds from different sources. The majority of our funding over time has come from private family foundations. So these are like wealthy families that have set up foundations and want to do good things with the family's money. We don't have any government funding. That's not something that we're sort of ideologically opposed to, but it just hasn't been a road that we've traveled down. We're a member of an organization called 1% for the Planet. I don't think that's necessarily known in Canada, but maybe it is. And it's like a matchmaking service between private companies and nonprofit organizations. And these are private companies that have made a certain environmental commitment and are channeling 1% of, I guess, their profits each year into nonprofit causes. So we've had some funding through that network as well. And then finally, we have a lot of individual donors who just, believe very strongly that we should have sort of a more robust food garden sector out there, and are making that sort of that value statement via a donation to seed money.
Amazing. And if you go to the website, there's a donation button, correct?
There is, yes. We wouldn't be sort of a legitimate nonprofit organization if that donation button wasn't pretty obvious.
Yeah, so anyone who is interested in making a donation, you can go to seedmoney.org. There's a little donate button. And then again, I'll put it in the show notes so you can quickly grab that if that's something that interests you. Roger, do you have any memorable stories or garden adventures that you've been witness to that you might want to share?
Well, I think the most memorable garden stories that anyone has are the ones that are quite personal to them, right? The ones where you've had some personal involvement. There might be some blood, sweat, and tears that were sort of involved in those projects. And some of the ones that have meant the most to me are the ones that I've actually been a part of myself. And part of my journey to what I'm doing is not only that of just an individual gardener, but a dad. And my wife had this background because she grew up in a rural part of Belgium where she had this exposure to gardens and to small farms. And as a couple, we wanted to make sure that our kids had sort of that as part of their growing up as well. So one of the things that I realized as a dad was that there weren't that many school gardens in our community. And there was like this moment where I said to myself, wow, I'm really busy just being a dad, and I'm busy trying to get this nonprofit organization, off the ground. And I felt like I was juggling a lot already. And so the idea that I'm going to carve out some time to get a bunch of school gardens planted in my own community was like, well, maybe or maybe not. But I just realized that there was this moment where it's like, if I don't do it, who's going to do this, right? And what I discovered was sometimes you just kind of need to get things started. And you can sort of say to yourself, oh, that sounds like too much work. But what you realize is that if you have an idea that is compelling to you, there's a pretty good chance that it's compelling to other people too. And sometimes you just need to get the ball rolling. And so that was what I did with some of the school gardens in my own community in Scarborough, Maine, USA. And it was really a sort of a teachable moment for me personally, because I just realized that it doesn't always have to come down to you. Maybe you will get something started, but there just is this sort of wealth of good energy out there in a community that you can tap into. But sometimes you have to just take the initiative and take a little bit of a risk by putting yourself out there. And what I quickly realized with the school gardens in my town was that there were so many people who were better at this than I was. and and it's like, at that point, it's like, okay, I'm going to get out of the way at this point. There's always going to be some other people out there to sort of take things over. And so that was really meaningful for me to see those garden projects get started, and then to get sort of transferred over to other people who were even better placed than I was to make sure that they were successful.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, were there multiple school gardens within your area that were started?
Yeah, there really weren't any when, like I said, I got the ball rolling. But then it became sort of a thing. It also had to do with the sort of the socio-economic climate at the time. I think it was probably in like 2008 or so, 2009, when there was the Great Recession. Gardening is always a little bit of an easier sell to people when during a time of crisis, whether it's an economic crisis, a climate crisis. So I think at that time it was a little bit easier to get a conversation started about the benefits of gardening. And I think that is still something that we as gardeners and garden advocates have to be thinking about. We have to be thinking about, how do we make our case to the public? And what I've found to be most effective as a garden communicator is really to be understanding that there are people who are going to be walking through different doors to the garden, you might say. There are some who walk through like a health door. They're really interested in the health benefits of gardening, whereas others are very concerned about the climate crisis, and they want to be able to do something really sort of tangible to make a difference there. And then economics is a thing for certain people too. They say to themselves, wow, how much does that packet of seed cost? And how many carrots can I get with that? And so just understanding that they're different sort of messages that you can get out there to different people. And we really need to be, getting all of those messages out because certain messages land better than others with different people.
Mhm. And with the school gardens, now I'm curious, we do support a number of school gardens here. I hear something odd. We do support a number of school gardens here within our community garden group here too. We struggle with the summers, and I'm curious, since you got that project kind of moving, how did you guys deal with, the time off, the summers when all the students go home and the teachers are no longer there? Did parents commit to coming in and continuing to tend to the gardens?
They did, but it is a continuing challenge, I know, for school garden projects. There's the challenge of, getting people into the gardens during the summer. And then there's the challenge of getting the food out, right?
Yeah.
Because the summer is when, the garden season is sort of it's at its most bountiful usually.
Hmm.
So I know that it's just a continuing challenge for a lot of school garden projects, whether they're in Canada or the United States or elsewhere. But, I think that generally when you have sort of like a mature school garden program, they're pretty good about, you know, organizing their volunteers so that they do have families that will sign up for example, a week of, watering, weeding, and harvesting. But I do know that that's something that, requires a fair amount of work.
Yeah, we're always looking for new ways and new ideas to help facilitate the school gardens. What we've done this year is we put in a community garden in a park that's located next to one of the local high schools. And then the community garden, we have our garden champions. So they are the folks who lead that garden and they rally the volunteers and they make sure the gardens are growing. So they operate independently. And the school was part garden champion. And then we also got the neighborhood association involved and they're also part champion. So they communicate back and forth and they work together to make sure the garden's operating, and that neighborhood association really becomes key during the summer when the students are no longer in. And so our summers run from the end of June until the beginning of September. So it runs into harvest season as well. But by having it in the public park, the general community was able to also participate. So it became twofold. So far, it's been successful. We just had our first season at that site and it worked out well. But yeah, we continue to struggle with the gardens that go in at the schools. And sometimes we have schools approach us and say, hey, can you support a community garden going in here? And we say, yeah, but before we can agree to this, we need you to have committed volunteers in place for the summer. And then they're like, oh, we thought you were going to take care of it during the summer. So you know what I mean? There's more work there than I think people realize when it comes to the school gardens, and there needs to be that upfront organization and that upfront commitment.
Yeah, it's all about sort of creating group ownership for the project where you have to sort of say, well, there are going to be some amazing benefits that come out of this for you and your community, your school community, but you have to have the buy-in as well to sort of be the beneficiary of those benefits.
Mm-hmm. Now, just kind of backtracking a little bit, you had mentioned that during the recession, there was an increase in interest in gardening for various reasons. I'm curious regarding the pandemic. I know every region dealt with the pandemic in different ways. Here in Ontario, it was not fun. We were in lockdown for a very, very long period of time. And, we didn't have access to a lot of our rec activities. Eventually, 4 months into the pandemic, our community gardens were allowed to open back up because public parks were deemed essential. So we did get our community gardens back, but we saw a huge increase in the amount of folks that wanted to participate. And that's also when we launched our host garden program, and we had over 70 gardeners. I think it was more than that. Somebody's listening to this saying it was more than that, Taylor. But 70 gardeners immediately registered to learn how to grow gardens in their own home to donate that food. Like, we saw this huge increase in folks that wanted to participate. And did Seed Money experience that as well during the pandemic?
We definitely saw our numbers continue to go up, but I don't think those numbers went up, at the sort of the steep level that interest in home gardening went up, just because, as you know, as someone who's involved in a garden project, it does take a little bit more effort to get a public food garden started than just a 10-foot by 10-foot one in one's backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Just because there's some planning that goes into it. You have to sort of secure the space. You have to get the volunteers. So we definitely saw, kind of like a general increase in our numbers, but it wasn't sort of matching the increase that we saw in interest in backyard gardening.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was still, you know, helpful for people to sort of get into their backyards and realize that they could be doing that themselves, because ultimately it's the backyard gardeners I find who at some point later in life say, hey, wait a minute, I need to give back a little bit. I know how to do this for myself, and I'd like to share a little bit of my knowledge, share a little bit of my time with my community. The public food gardens of the future are being sown in a lot of backyards right now, I think.
Yeah, oftentimes, very seldomly do I come across folks who have never gardened before. Like, I love when people come up to me and say, I have no idea how to do this. I've never touched dirt. Like, we got you. But usually it's folks coming up to me saying, oh, I've been gardening for this amount of time. And I do a lot of education with the organization too. So I host workshops. I'll go into different facilities and schools and host workshops. And a lot of the times even if we are hosting a workshop on, say, how to plan your garden, typically the folks who are coming oftentimes have more knowledge than I do. They're older. I'm only 27. I have many, many years to develop my skills. And as we know, gardening's all trial and error. So oftentimes there's folks there that know more than I do. And I always have to preface my workshops that there are people in the room who know more than I do. And if you're interested in contributing, please speak up, because I have something to learn from you too. So very seldomly do we get people who have never touched dirt. It's usually folks who, again, have been backyard gardening, who want to contribute to the community, which is very fun. We love sharing resources. A lot of the information that we actually take to this podcast goes into a gardening resource that will be released hopefully in winter, and it's specific to gardening in this area, contributed by folks who actually garden here. So being able to kind of capture that knowledge has been very fun. Is there anything else about seed money specifically that you would like to add to the conversation? Anything that we may have missed or that you would like to mention?
Well, one other sort of cool thing for the techies out there is that sort of rolled into our grants package, we also offer garden projects free access to an online garden planner, which is just a lot of fun to use, especially if you're living in our climates in January, February. You're not able to get out there. You're not able to sort of crack the permafrost, but you want to be thinking about your garden and actually, getting a little bit of a head start with it. We're partnering with a company that makes this great online garden planning software, and that's something that we make available to all of our grantees and any project that requests it, basically, whether you raise money or not.
Yeah, we haven't used it before because we try to get our gardeners to do that themselves, but we do have the massive 60-bed garden that's gone in this year that I will be running next year that could probably use some tech help with. It's a lot of space.
It's a lot of space, and it's just a great resource, especially for somebody who's never done this type of thing before, and even for people like me who've been at this for a long time and continue to struggle with certain things. It's just another way of sort of like checking your work as well, to say, oh, maybe I can't fit that fourth zucchini plant into that space.
Yeah. Not with how big they get, that's for sure. So if you're open to it, I have some questions for you about your own personal gardening experience and how you garden as an individual. Yeah, you're down for that?
Yeah.
So we did talk about, your origin story, which was fabulous. I loved hearing that. I'm curious, do you garden personally now? And if you do, what does that look like?
We do, yeah. My wife and I have a pretty good sized garden in our backyard. We're actually in the process of downsizing it a little bit. We're trying to figure out what is the right amount of space for us. I mentioned that we have 3 sons, and they are no longer living in the area, so we're not having to feed all those mouths. We do have a few grandsons, though, so maybe we need to make sure we don't reduce the size of it too much. But the new footprint for next year is going to be about just 400 square feet. And yeah, we grow a lot, and try to get an early start and a late finish. We don't have any structures in place anymore. I've sort of gone through that phase where we had a small greenhouse and we had hoop houses, we had cold frames, but I am trying to simplify a little bit sort of in my old age to make sure that I'm putting the right amount of time into the garden. But yeah, so we have a nice garden in the back, and we're looking forward to some fall harvests and hopefully a great season next year as well.
What types of things did you grow this year?
Well, it was a little bit of a weird year, I have to say, just because I feel like I definitely was better at growing weeds this year than anything else. But that just had to do with some sort of weird family dynamics where my mom took a fall in June. And so I was a little bit more focused on trying to help her and my father. And then my family had this trip planned to Belgium, which was going to be a family reunion. We hadn't been back in Belgium for a long time as a family. And so that sort of also landed right smack dab in the middle of the garden season. And I left the garden in early August and it was already pretty weedy. And I came back and it was just a jungle. So we definitely got, decent harvests of many different things, but it wasn't as productive as it could have been. But once we had sort of pulled the weeds, we found that there was still a lot sort of growing on underneath there. And so we're still getting, harvests of root vegetables, our last tomatoes, the fall crops in terms of kale and some other cabbage family crops. Yeah, and we're looking forward to planting garlic soon. That season
Yeah.
is always fun.
At the beginning of the episode, we kind of give our local folks some housekeeping tips for their gardens here. And that was this week's was get your garden in soon and start prepping and start sourcing that. Our squirrels are still being a little bit crazy. So if you plant garlic right now, they're going to steal it for no reason. But, over the next couple of weeks, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting my garlic in too. Oh, speaking of tomatoes, it's interesting that you say that you are just wrapping up your tomato harvest. Most of Southern Ontario, I think it's because of the amount of rain that we've had this year and last year. We've had record amounts of rain. I don't know if you guys have been experiencing the same thing, but I think due to the rain, everybody's tomatoes suffered severely with blight. I actually pulled all of my tomatoes out of the garden in end of July, beginning of August, because it wasn't doing anything, and the blight, it wasn't even something that you could control. The community gardens all suffered with it. Most of the gardeners that we support suffered with it. There have been a few gardeners that I've heard about. Oddly, the new gardeners, the people who are just giving it a try this year, and I think it has something to do with the nutrient contents in their soil. They have been okay, but for the most part, everyone had a very bad tomato year. Did you guys experience any blight this year?
We definitely had some blight. It wasn't as bad as what you're describing. So the plants that tended to be most affected were like the heirloom tomatoes, like the bigger tomatoes. So our biggest harvests of tomatoes were definitely the cherry tomatoes. They seem to hold up better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I could probably still pull some cherry tomatoes. We didn't cut the tomatoes out at our largest garden site this year. They're still there because there was still a couple. It was mostly the cherries, though. Yeah, it's always the Romas, the sauce tomatoes, the determinate tomatoes that get smacked first. But yeah, honestly, we haven't had a good year with a lot of crops. Our farmers suffered with our strawberry season this year, and this is a big strawberry area. And there were a lot of crops that were really affected this year, despite the high amounts of rain. I don't think I watered our community garden maybe 3 times for context. It rained. And where we are, we have really, really sandy soil. We're right along a very large river, and most of the area has sandy soil. So really good drainage. So it's not like, things are getting waterlogged. But yeah, I don't know. The blight was it was so bad that I don't know if I want to grow tomatoes next year.
It is sad, and that's definitely one of my favorite crops to grow too. The perfect summer tomato is something that gardeners spend months and months thinking about, right? Anticipating. So it's a hard blow when you put that time into the plants and you see that maybe they're thriving at the beginning of the season and then you see them take another direction. So
yeah,
but there's some sort of a life lesson in there, I'm sure, about just being resilient and keeping at it and, understanding that we're fairly small actors in a much bigger system and we have to sort of be good about that and know what, our climate and our soils do well and sort of effortlessly making sure that we're growing those things. But it's fun to also to try, right? To
challenge Mother Nature.
Challenge Mother Nature. I've definitely have done my share of that. I've occasionally won the battle, but it's often a humbling experience too.
We did a loofah fundraiser this year, so we sold loofah seedlings. Have you ever grown loofah before?
I haven't, no.
Technically, they're tropicals, and people kept saying, these are tropical plants. Why are we growing them here? I said, just put them in the ground. I can almost guarantee you're going to get something out of them. And again, it's that challenging Mother Nature with a tropical plant. And I've harvested a couple of loofah sponges already this year and have a couple more on the way. And our first frost date is supposed to be like now. We're having a really warm autumn, so we probably have a little bit to go before we get that first frost. So I'm going to let the loofahs continue to do what they're doing, and many of our other gardeners have gotten them. But yeah, challenging Mother Nature with some of those fun crops is always exciting.
Yeah.
What is one thing you dislike about gardening?
I think one of the hardest things in my backyard is mosquito season. There's like a moment when, the temperature warms up to be, whatever it needs to be. And then we have some torrential rains. And then it just is a few days later that the mosquitoes take over. So I think that's always trouble, always problematic, I should say. But it's also, part of gardening. You have to deal with the critters and the various challenges. So I just try to time my entry and departures from the garden at the right time when the mosquitoes are out there. But it can be tough when you have some chores that are out there waiting for you. And unfortunately, the mosquitoes are waiting too.
What is your favorite vegetable to eat?
Well, I mentioned that sort of elusive, perfect summer tomato. That's definitely one of them. But I also love just salad greens. It may sound a little bit boring to people, but there's something I think that's so cool about just being able to go into your backyard with a sharp knife and harvest a salad for your lunch or for dinner. It doesn't take up that much space, and they grow back. It's like, wow. It's like, why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah, arguably one of the easiest ways to grow your own food is to just pop any of those green seeds in the ground and something's going to grow. And then, yeah, if you take care of it properly, you'll have abundance for the whole season. So are there any vegetables you don't like?
Nothing that I would sort of categorize as like hate, but I'm not a big fan of rutabagas. There's like a kind of an old-timey flavor to rutabagas that
I love rutabaga. We call it turnip here. I love turnip.
But maybe it's because I haven't had it in the right dish, so maybe it's more about my cuisine than the garden or the vegetable itself. So it's not something that's a big part of our cuisine.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that has to do also with the Belgian connection. I don't think the Belgians eat a lot of rutabagas and turnips, because we do try to grow, a fair amount of things that sort of work both for, American cuisine and Belgian cuisine, since my wife is from Belgium. So we have lots of leeks in the backyard right now, for example. Potatoes, that's really a big staple for the Belgians. Mm-hmm. Salad greens.
Are there any crops that we just typically don't grow here at all that you guys include in your gardening process because of those Belgian ties?
I don't think so. I mean, when people think about Belgian sort of varieties, a lot of people will think of, for example, Brussels sprouts. Mm-hmm. But I think that's something that
very common.
We're growing here too, right?
Yeah. I personally love some pickled turnip, especially in a salad. Kind of add some spice to it. Very easy to make. But in the way that my family always made turnip dishes, we literally would boil it and mash it, and that's it. And we'd put some butter on it. It's my favorite part about Thanksgiving is that turnip dish. And honestly, I think it's because the flavor is very basic. There's not a lot to it. It feels very healthy. And I think when you're eating a lot of pie and a lot of gravy and things like that, especially during Thanksgiving and during Christmas, I think having that turnip is a bit of a palate reset, and then also kind of adds a little bit of a health component. So that's probably why I like it so much, is that it is kind of bland and it's a very basic, we prepare it in a very basic way. Okay, I did fact check myself here because something didn't seem right, and I'm blaming my family for this one. A rutabaga and a turnip are not the same. They actually are different. A rutabaga is a lot bigger, and it's usually the one coated in a wax, whereas a turnip is like an oversized radish and is a little bit like purple. I play a lot of Animal Crossing, so you think I would know this, but when I'm talking about how we make, quote, turnip, I'm actually talking about a rutabaga, and my family has called it turnip my entire life. I've never called it rutabaga. I genuinely thought they were the same thing, and they are not. Now, when it boils down to it, I don't think I like turnip either. Actually, that's not true. I do really like pickled turnip. I love pickled turnip. You go get some shawarma and you get all the pickled stuff in there. Pickled turnip's delicious. However, they are different. I apologize. Okay, bye.
Yeah, well, some of the best things are the simplest things, right? I would always chuckle when my wife told me the story about, you know, asking her mother what her favorite food was and having her say potatoes. Uh,
I mean,
but
yeah.
but potatoes can be amazing, right?
Yes. Yeah, they are delicious. I grew little fingerling ones this year. And yeah, they're great when we'll roast them up on the barbecue. Now, I apologize. This question wasn't on my initial list for you, so I apologize to put you on the spot. You've been gardening for a very long time and you work in this world. And is there any piece of advice or one thing that you really had to learn the hard way that you wish that new gardeners knew?
Well, I think a big challenge new gardeners and older gardeners like myself sort of struggle with is finding balance. Making sure that you are kind of like checking in with yourself from time to time because gardening is work, but it's good work when you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
But there can be moments when you feel like you're not doing it right, and it's sort of like has shifted into being more of a chore than a pleasure. So just you know trying to tune into your own gardening experience to make sure that you're kind of staying in the fun zone as opposed to the chore zone. And so I think that that's something that new gardeners have to sort of be aware of going into the process because they will often go in with so much energy, so much
Yeah.
enthusiasm, and they'll be thinking about how can I make the garden even bigger. And if you saw the footprint of my garden over the years, it went from being really small to really big to less big and a little bit smaller even now. And so that's fine. There's like a natural sort of evolution I think that some people will go through where they kind of settle on what's the right balance for them. But it is something that you continue to sort of work on, whether you're 27 or 58. In my case, you're trying to figure out what's the right balance. But in terms of the things that I'm still working on spacing. I should know better than to try to cram that fourth zucchini plant in. But I just say to myself, oh, I can pull it off. My soil is rich enough that it can do it. And, I'm going to yank the plant, before it's like over mature so that the younger plant can sort of move into that space. But the planets don't always align the way that we think they're going to, right?
Yeah, I always say, especially to new gardeners, and when you were talking about downscaling your garden, I was chuckling in my head about this, about how some folks do come into this. Most of us do. We come in, tons and tons of energy. Our eyes are bigger than the time we actually have. Our plans are bigger than the time we actually have. And we get a couple years in and we're like, this kind of sucks. This wasn't as fun as I thought it was. And it's just because we've taken on a little bit too much, and then you scale back a little bit and you find that balance. So it's funny that you say that. Also, sometimes, along those lines, I don't think folks always realize that bigger doesn't necessarily mean more food or your ability to grow more. And oftentimes, if you just really hone in on the space that you have and you hone in on the garden that you already have, you can actually get more out of it. I really want to avoid making gardening a chore because I also do it for work. So I have a bunch of measures in place for my own garden so that I don't have to water and I don't have to weed. And that really kind of takes a lot of those kind of tasks out of the picture for me so that when I do go into my garden, it's usually for reasons that I want to be there for. Yeah, I agree. Finding balance and also understanding that there's other ways to do things is very important. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. That's some great advice. I think understanding that you can get a lot out of a small space as well, and you can maybe even have a little bit more fun in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Roger, I'm so incredibly thankful that, you've chatted with us. Thank you for sharing everything that you have.
It was a pleasure, and thanks so much for gardening and for sharing your love of gardening with people in your community and even further afield via the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Roger, that was incredible. Thank you so much. For everyone listening, I hope you take the opportunity to either consider running a campaign on seed money if you run a community garden, or consider supporting campaigns. Again, Equal Ground will be running a campaign this year, and if you follow us on social media, you will see it. I will talk about it. I'll also talk about it here on the podcast. You'll have an opportunity to support us or to click through the campaigns. You also might be able to click through them for whatever area you're living in if you want to support something local. And also, again, this is a global platform, so spread the word, tell your gardening friends that this platform exists, and yeah, let's get some campaigns going. So once Roger and I got off, well, we stopped recording specifically, I let Roger know he was a fabulous speaker. I thought he sounded very great and was so well put together. I was a little bit starstruck. Roger actually told me he has done a TEDx talk, which I thought was so cool. So I wanted to share it with you. It's called come on, Taylor, you got this. My Subversive Garden Plot. And you can find it just by Googling TEDx, and you can either Google Roger's name or you can Google the title of the TEDx, My Subversive Garden Plot. I will also put it in the show notes for you, which you can access at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. But thank you, Roger. Thank you for coming and sharing your expertise with us, sharing everything about the Seed Money platform and also about your personal gardening experience. It's always amazing to hear how somebody else is doing things, especially in another location. All right, let's chat about today's gardening tip. This one is going to seem obvious to a lot of you, but when it really cracks down to it, none of us do this enough. Please, right now, go and disinfect your snippers. Go get some rubbing alcohol or some hydrogen peroxide or even some soap and water if that's all you have, and go give them a quick wipe down or a quick scrub. This is going to set you up for next year. Let's try that again. This is really going to help you fight the spread of pests and diseases, particularly diseases. If you're trimming blight off your plant, you don't want to then turn around and go to another plant, another healthy plant. It's going to help spread a lot of that. So very much like washing your hands, go clean your trimmers. I promise you're not going to regret it. Thank you again to the City of Brantford and the Brant Community Foundation for funding this podcast. Also, a big thank you to our board of directors for letting me run with this project. The Community Garden Podcast is administered by Equal Ground Community Gardens, and you can view this episode's full show notes at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. I'll ensure that I include all of the links and all of the resources that we chatted about in this interview. So if you heard something and you liked it, go take a peek in the show notes and there'll probably be more information there. Podcast production and editing is by Matt Wilfred at Nuthatch Consulting, and you can get in touch with Matt at nuthatchconsulting@gmail.com. Our graphic design is done by Ben at All Day Breakfast. And thank you to our lovely podcast committee, Paulina, Charlene, and Kat, for all of your hard work. And please consider following, subscribing, rating, reviewing, whatever it is that your podcast platform allows you to do. It is going to help us reach more people. You can also follow Equal Ground on Facebook at Equal Ground Community Gardens and consider joining our Facebook support group at the exact same name. You do not have to be local. Come and join us. And you can find us on Instagram at equal_ground. And finally, you can learn more about our organization at www.egcgbrant.ca. If you would like to be on this podcast as a guest, you can email me at podcast@egcgbrant.ca, or you can visit the show notes page at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. Okay, friends, I shall leave you here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm just so happy we got to speak with Roger, and I will see you next week.